A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
When you're a part of a local church, you realise that it's often the case that pastors and leaders find it challenging to encourage their congregations to actively disciple others outside of Sunday services. I mean, whose job is disciple making anyway? Lots of people think it's the job of the pastor. Well, for the first time in Australia, two significant Christian leaders are hosting a one-day summit in 3 of our national capital cities aimed at empowering church teams and members to engage, rethink and reframe the way they disciple others. Paul Bartlett, the founder of Mobilise Australia, is teaming up with Paul Gibbs, who founded the global Pais movement. The first of these events is called DiscipleCom, and it's happening on Saturday, this coming Saturday, the 8th, in Sydney. The following weekend it'll be in Brisbane and then in Melbourne on the 22nd. Paul Bartlett is joining us, and just by the way, Paul is also National Leader for Community Engagement for the Australian Christian Churches. Paul, a special welcome back to 2020.
Thank you, Neil. Great to be with you again.
Paul, great to talk about discipleship and disciple making. Let's start with what might be the very basics, but sometimes confusing. Where do you think our discipleship journey starts?
I think it starts in the community during the week. And, I was a senior pastor for 22 years, and I could tell culturally in my church and many churches I was speaking at that discipleship kind of got activated when somebody walked into your church. And I always thought that was a strange place to begin.
Lots of us think that discipleship is optional, and I wonder if there's any way you've got any, you might have a biblical foundation for saying something other than that, but oftentimes you might be thinking that there are people in church who think that, well, if I decide to do something in discipleship, then, that's my choice. What are your thoughts? Is this optional?
I certainly don't think it's optional, but I think one of the reasons we've made it optional because when we imagine discipleship, we think of sitting down with somebody, maybe going through a Bible study, teaching the Word. Now, I agree that would be a part of it at a certain stage. But, one of the things we taught our church to do, I think you've got to simplify discipleship. We used to call discipleship in my church coffee with intention. In other words, Aussies love coffee. We do it all the time. All we're saying to people is, listen, on those days when you're having coffee with a friend that's not a Christian, have a couple of an intentional coaching type questions. How is life going? What's good? What's not so good? In fact, I have a general rule, and as you know, I was the chaplain for an NBL basketball team for 17 years, and I never finished having lunch or coffee with any of those players without saying this. It's been great to catch up today. What's one thing I could be praying for you about over the next month before we meet again? I've done that hundreds of times, and I've never had anybody say, any non-Christian ever say, well, you're not praying for me. What I do is when I meet with them for coffee again, is I say, listen, I've been praying for you. How is that going? And often people would say, you're not going to believe it. This happened. And it keeps the conversation of faith going in the relationships with you, people you have during the week.
It's a funny thing, Paul, that when we talk about intentional disciple making, we sound like we're talking about work. But when you include the word coffee and sitting down together and having a great conversation, it takes it out of the work realm and puts it into, hey, this is a really good pursuit, something I enjoy doing. That should be the way it ought to be, isn't it?
It is, and it should be the key to discipleship. And look, again, I'll say it, sometimes I'd be speaking to my church about discipleship or evangelism, and I could tell by the look in their faces, they'd be thinking, oh, goodness me, Pastor Paul is giving us another job we've got to do this week. And I think everybody already feels overwhelmed. They're already not sure how to share the gospel. And so the key is discipleship needs to be taught how to do it in the rhythm of your everyday life. In other words, you're probably playing soccer or you're playing basketball or footy with your mates. I'm better off as a leader teaching you what does discipleship look like in those moments? I'm not asking you to add anything to your life. I'm simply asking you to have a focus around discipling people in the things you're already doing. So DiscipleCom is that collision between community and disciple that you're already doing every day of the week.
Paul, for that person who's saying, well, what if I don't? Really, I haven't got any time for this. It's hard enough for me just getting to church on Sunday, and I feel like sometimes I'm warming the pew. And then, as you say, the pastor says, hey, I want you to do something intentional. It is like getting an extra job, but if you don't, is it true that we are actually being discipled by all of the influences that we allow into our lives? And so are all of those around us. So if we don't have intentional conversations as Christian believers when we meet together, that somehow or other the values are being missed.
Exactly. And look, you're so right. We're all being influenced by somebody or something. So that's, we don't even need to talk about that. All we're adding in simple terms is we're saying to people, what if we could teach you how to say or do a few intentional things in your everyday week, which won't even feel like work? It might be a good question. It might be an act of kindness that just keeps conversations of faith going. My whole I work with hundreds of churches across Australia. My whole focus is to rethink the labour and the arduousness of the concept of evangelism discipleship in a way that people can, have a small toolkit of discipleship, things they can do any day of the week that's not going to freak them out. And that's essentially why Paul Gibbs and I, the two Pauls, we've put together this one-day event that's going to just really make it nice and simple for people to understand how to do that on Monday when they go into their normal lives.
Doing a one-day event, is that long enough to start a new habit? Because I guess you're talking here about what it is from within us that helps spark that conversation. And having that come naturally, and as you say, might be 2 or 3 times a week you're having these interactions, but a day-long event, DiscipleCom, is that enough to get you on a different trajectory and change some of the habits and get you ready for this?
Well, I think it's a start, because what we've done is, certainly you'll hear real-life stories from Paul and I in how we've been able to disciple people to Christ. In fact, I'll let you know, even as a senior pastor, most senior pastors can say, yeah, we lead people to Christ, but they're talking about an invitation at the end of a Sunday service. Well, I've practiced for the last 25 years of my life leading people to Christ outside of my church life in the everyday, and on average it would take me 2 years to disciple a non-Christian to Christ. What Paul and I will do on that day is we will give you a small amount of tools that will begin you on the journey, but we'll also be talking about, so for example, Mobilise Australia, the ministry you mentioned at the start. I have anything from a 4-month coaching program that we can do with your church leaders or your church people, right down to staged one-day training programs that we can do so we can mobilise your whole church. And I get it. I agree with you. Listen, one of the reasons I'm doing this, I don't want to just inspire people with great 1-hour messages. I want to help them transform their church culture. And in fact, Mobilise the turnaround is what we call it, so we can turn your culture around towards your community.
Paul, you mentioned 3 things that you might use to spark that conversation. Give us one of those. We haven't got a lot of time to unpack a whole bunch of these, but what comes to mind for you if we're looking for a takeaway from a conversation like this one today, just to get started?
Fantastic. A great question to ask anybody having coffee or lunch with is to simply ask them, hey, what is the most difficult thing you're facing in your life today? That question it does a couple of things. One is it opens a new avenue of friendship in a way that you can talk to people about and listen to them about what they're going through. Secondly, my encouragement, as I said early, is you add the prayer response. Hey, I'd love to pray for you about that. So my motto is, when a non-Christian hears the word prayer, or I'm going to pray for you, they don't hear prayer, they hear the word care. Prayer is care to a non-Christian. So my encouragement to anybody is ask a question that incites your response being, I'm going to pray for you about that. And I think from then on, you just keep saying, I've been praying for you. How's it going? How can we help? What can I do for you? Acts of kindness might come out of that. That's a simple thing anybody can do anywhere, anytime.
Paul, someone's going to say, but Paul, my church doesn't even talk about disciple making. My pastor doesn't seem to be all that thrilled with doing some extra things like this. Do you have to be in a church where everybody's on the same page and doing the disciple making thing? Or can you start doing this in your own private faith devotional living life?
Absolutely. In fact, Neil, that's a great question, because I often, when I teach community engagement, I often have somebody come up, and it's often not senior pastors in the room, and they'll say to me, they're asking, well, how do I do that? How do I reach my community? My pastor's not into it and all that sort of stuff. And I often say to them, listen, are you telling me that the 1 hour a week that your pastor has you in the room on Sundays controls your whole week? I said, that's absolutely not true. Unless your pastor is with you every day, then you have 6 other days of the week that you can build friendships, ask good connections, have intentional coffee, do acts of kindness. Your pastor's not precluding you from doing those things, and I'm sure at some level he or she would be happy for you to be doing them. But I say to you, probably some days a day where the pastor has got you in that space where you can't. Maybe you're not doing everything or don't agree with everything, but you've got 6 other days of the week that you can express your God-given gifts and talents into your community for the purpose of the kingdom. Absolutely.
And I guess it's a humbling thing to reflect on Jesus' words, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. He's not just talking about a select few. We're all included in that. We've all got a role to play. Now, DiscipleCom is what is coming up. There's 3 events that are being planned. These 2 speakers, 2 friends, Paul Bartlett, founder of Mobilise Australia, and Paul Gibbs, who founded the global Pais movement. They're teaming up for DiscipleCom events. There's one on this Saturday in Sydney on the 8th. Then the following weekend in Brisbane on the 15th of February, then in Melbourne on the 22nd of February. There is a website here, DiscipleCom.info. I guess there's got to be a huge advantage, Paul, to get in quick and to have a seat in one of these conferences. Do you know if it's being live streamed?
It's not being live streamed at the moment. In fact, this is our first one, so Paul and I decided to do this one in-house, so definitely come for the in-person experience. Subsequent ones that we do after this, definitely we're going to move it online and make it more available to people. But we'd love you to come in person. As you said, just register at DiscipleCom.info. Hey, it's a good price. It's $69 per person. But if you bring 5 or more of your team, it drops down to $50. It'll be a day well spent. It focuses people around discipleship and their community. And from there, leaders and pastors can learn more ways to dive into this deeper in a way that we have seen, both Paul and I. Paul's been running Pais for over 20 years. I've worked with literally hundreds of churches all over Australia for the last 15 years and overseas, and we've seen incredible results when we mobilise everyday Christians in their everyday lives. We'd love to see you a part of those events.
A great event to be part of. And just to remind you that, we're talking to Paul Bartlett. He's the National Leader for Community Engagement for the Australian Christian Churches. It's a big and versatile and significant Christian denominational movement, and he's got time to extend that reach beyond the ACC and for you to turn up at one of these DiscipleCom events. That website, DiscipleCom.info. Paul Bartlett, thanks so much for sharing these insights with us today on 2020.
Thanks so much, Neil. Good to talk.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.